Welcome to the Mirror Talks podcast, where we deconstruct some of humanity's most disconnecting and limiting assumptions and offer an alternative, a free state of consciousness, unbiased, naturally wise, and genuinely loving. We will shed a more enlightened perspective on everyday experiences to help anyone willing realize their true potential and inspire a contemporary spiritual life lived in service to all. Say goodbye to the man-made paradigms of distorted ideas. Let's become pure, free, and actually intelligent once again.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Mirror Talks podcast with Bentinho Massaro. This one is about understanding and using our emotions as the resources they are, as the guidance they are. The episode is called Become Emotionally Intelligent, which I love because it's so different from what's out there in terms of emotional IQ, being empathetic, noticing and responding appropriately to what other people are feeling, etc. So it actually answers the question, what are emotions and what's the best way to use them for my development? And it also answers a question that I think most people won't ever otherwise consider, which is, what happens if I take this all the way and master the lessons of my emotional experience entirely? So the emotional guidance system was the first teaching I ever heard Bentinho share, and it was what drew me in immediately. I can tell you firsthand that the more you integrate what the emotional guidance system is and how to use it, the more of an imperturbable force for good you'll be. So get this anchored in and the other stuff comes easy. Just one heads up that this episode is long, and it starts with Bentinho reading from The Law of One, which is notoriously technical, but it's an important setup for the rest of the episode, so stick with it. Get comfy and give this episode your full attention. You won't regret it.
All right. Well, welcome, guys. Here we are, 3:45 a.m.
Yeah.
Always fun.
It
And
is.
today, there was a dialogue in one of our group chats, which sparked some inspiration for a session. And I could kind of see how we address most of those points in a single session. It could all tie together beautifully in generating this understanding about the purpose of emotions, the usage of emotions, the how to understand emotions, first of all. And then once the purpose of emotions is clear, we can just talk a little bit about the process or journey of refining that and kind of moving it more towards its end goal of the purpose of emotions, to follow that thread of purpose when an emotion arises, rather than to just be randomly overtaken by emotions. Yeah, so guys, I'll be reading a little excerpt from The Law of One. One of the people in one of our group chats shared this with us/me this morning, asking me to make a distinction that Ra, which is the answer part of what I'm about to read you, it's Q&A, for me to clarify a distinction that Ra makes. So this is taken from the work called The Raw Material, or The Law of One. And it's one of those timeless pieces of writing that I recommend anyone with an interest to go and try to dissect. First of all, good luck. And second of all, I hope you're blown away by what it proposes. And I hope that the way it is languaged and presented at your own discretion will also reveal to you its authenticity. So for me, the validity of it has been proven. Really, like, the proof is in the pudding in this case, meaning when you read the material, and doesn't matter how skeptical you are, if you keep an open mind and you're open for what's objectively most likely true, then this material will prove its own worth and its own validity. And it's claimed to not be from a human source. So that's kind of the threshold to get past as a skeptic. But again, proof is in the pudding. Give it a shot. See what you think. Anyway, I refer to this material quite a bit. I comment on it quite a bit. And a lot of the elements that are found, a lot of the language found in this body of work, I have incorporated over the years into the way that I translate my own experiences and my own distillations between different teachings, including this teaching. So, here, our friend in the group chat posted a quote, quite a long question, and it's all about emotions, positive, negative emotions, and most of all, how to remain unswayed by emotions, or how to not be disturbed by emotions, how to not be moved by emotions, how to be, in a sense, detached, you could say, how to understand emotions, and so forth. Questioner, this is, by the way, for those interested, this is session 42.2. Questioner, I will just read it very rapidly, the question, then. I'm going to make a statement and ask you to comment on its degree of accuracy. I'm assuming that the balanced entity, this is referring to a spiritually balanced entity who, in the language of Ra, has balanced their energy centers, but you could also just see that as someone who has observed their own behaviors, their patterns, and their beliefs over time. And through that self-awareness and through knowing exactly sort of how to balance the psyche, the psychology, the spiritual, mental, emotional makeup and behavioral makeup of the entity that you are, the more time and awareness one spends pondering that in the right ways, the more balance is generated in the entity. So a fully balanced entity could also be equated to an enlightened being, so to speak. I am assuming that the balanced entity would not be swayed either towards positive or negative emotions by any situation which he might confront. By remaining unemotional in any situation, the balanced entity may clearly discern the appropriate and necessary responses that are in harmony with the law of one, or simply unity consciousness, for each situation. Most entities on our planet, this is still the question, find themselves unconsciously caught up into every emotional situation which they come in contact with, according to their own unique biases, and because of these biases are unable to see clearly the teach/learning opportunities and appropriate response in each emotional situation, and must therefore, through a process of much trial and error, and enduring a resulting pain, repeat such situations many, many times until they become consciously aware of the need to balance their energy centers, and thusly their responses and behaviors. Once a person becomes consciously aware of the need to balance their energy centers and responses, the next step is to allow the appropriately positive or negative responses to emotional situations to flow smoothly through their being without retaining any of the emotional coloration after it has been consciously observed and allowed to flow through the being. And I am assuming that this ability to consciously observe the positively or negatively charged energy flowing through the being may be augmented by practice of the balancing exercises you have given us, with the result in balance being achieved for the entity, which would allow him to remain unemotional and undisturbed in regards to the law of one in any situation, much like the objective viewer of the television movie. Is this correct? Quite a long question, but I'm sure you got the gist of it. Ra. I am Ra. This is an incorrect application of the balancing which we have discussed. The exercise of first experiencing feelings and then consciously discovering their antithesis within the being has as its objective, let me just very briefly explain this. The exercise that Ra gives earlier on in the Law of One to help balance the entity, to help the entity understand itself and come to an acceptance and to a balanced state so that it can truly sort of quantum leap into its spiritual progression, into its spiritual expansion, and focus more on matters of the spirit and expansion and God consciousness and so forth, or the law of one directly. And so in order to make the entity, the self, the individual self, balanced, one of the exercises they give is to realize that any quality is within us, any polarity is within us, and to instead of only identifying with the things we think we want to be, to basically begin to identify with everything, to begin to accept the fact that everything exists within us. So if you have, one of the examples they use is, if you find yourself feeling patient, then find the feeling of impatience and accept that thought as well. Accept that thought form, that emotion as well, as being part of who you are. Not to identify with it, but to allow them, in a sense, to cancel out the charge of polarity, of black and white, of good versus bad. Conversely, if you find yourself being impatient, find the antithesis to that within yourself. Find the feeling of patience. And just by kind of doing that, like let's say you're angry, find the emotion of peace or love or compassion or patience. And if you continue to do this back and forth, you will find a natural sort of freedom from the emotional process begins to dawn on you as these energies begins to balance themselves out, as the biases are thinned out by this process. So there's much more I could say about that, but for the purpose of sticking to this topic, I will continue. But that's what they mean with the balanced entity or the balancing exercise. So again, Ra says, this is an incorrect application of the balancing which we have discussed. The exercise of first experiencing feelings and then consciously discovering their antithesis within the being has as its objective not the smooth flow of feelings, both positive and negative, while remaining unswayed, but rather the objective of becoming unswayed. This is a simpler result and takes much practice, shall we say. So that's one of the distinctions that they make, and I'll explain it in a little bit. The catalyst of experience, which catalyst is another word for basically challenge or invitation. It's an invitation. It's something that begins a process. It's an initiation. The word catalyst is used throughout the Law of One to indicate any experience that has any kind of charge for the entity that perceives that experiential occurrence. And they call that catalyst. So typically we call that challenge or hardship or invitation or initiation or struggle or pain or suffering. But also pleasure and joy can also be catalytic in different ways. The catalyst of experience works in order for the learned teachings of this density, this dimension, our earthly experience, to occur. However, if there is seen in the being a response to the catalyst of experience, to something that pops up in your experience. However, if there is seen in the being a response to something that arises in your experience, something catalytic, even if it is simply observed, the entity is still using that catalyst for learned teaching. In other words, for learning. The end result is that the catalyst is no longer needed. This is referring to the end goal, so to speak, the purpose in the end, or what's achieved in the end. The end result is that the catalyst is no longer needed. So once you've learned from that particular theme in your life, that particular type of catalyst, that particular type of challenge, once you've fully learned everything you want to learn from it, everything your higher being, if you want, your true being, not your conscious mind, your overall inner being, wants to learn from that situation or type of experience or type of charge, then the catalyst is no longer needed. So catalyst is only a reflective mechanism to help us learn certain lessons. The quicker we learn those lessons, the sooner that type of catalyst can stop bugging us, if you will. The end result is that the catalyst is no longer needed. Thus, this density is no longer needed. So if catalytic experience of this density, of this dimension, of this earthly experience as we know it, is learned, then this density ultimately is no longer needed. And that's the exhaustion of a density. You could call that ascension. You could call that readiness for the next level, if you will, or the next dimension, or the next density of learning. This is not indifference or objectivity, because the questioner used the example of, for example, being like a camera that's objectively witnessing a situation. So Ra is saying this is not indifference, this end game when you no longer need the catalyst, when there is no emotional response, when there's no response in the being towards a situation that could be considered catalytic or challenging. This is not indifference or objectivity, but a finely tuned compassion and love, which sees all things as love. This seeing of all things as love elicits or triggers no response due to catalytic reactions. Thus, the entity is now able to become co-creator of experiential occurrences. This is the truer balance. What I answered is that Ra states, as I interpret it, that the aim of energetic balancing work is not to become unswayed while still having positive and negative emotions flow through one's experience about certain situations and events, etc. The goal is to become unswayed, period. To have no emotional responses towards any situation of this density, except the feeling and seeing and being of love. If an entity can attain this, they are done with this density for their own learning and can then become a mirror, or as Ra says it, a co-creator of experiential occurrences. But for as long as there is still some kind of response in our emotional state toward an experiential occurrence, even if we remain firm in the witnessing position and not get completely dragged down into the story of it. So if we maintain a stability, but there still is sort of an urge, there's still a charge-based response that comes up in us when we witness a certain kind of situation. It means we still are learning from that experience and haven't yet fully mastered that lesson, meaning there's more to learn. That's not a bad thing, it's just the way it is. Then the right thing to do at that point is to feel the feelings, to balance them out, to understand why we have the feelings, and to learn the lessons. So it's not like we should try to be masters of a certain type of thematic experience in our lives before we actually are. What we should do is attempt to the step that's relevant for us in that moment, which is to pay attention to the required balancing and the feelings that are coming up, and to understand them and accept them and so forth. If we master it, once we master it, our only emotional response is love. Not sappy compassion and pitying empathy, just stable, happy, confident, radiating love. Unshakable, unswayed, radiating ever present like the sun. The sun doesn't care what happens, what doesn't happen, what you do, what you don't do. It just continues to shine on all of us equally. That type of love will be your only emotional response to a situation that you have transcended or mastered the lessons of. So Ra makes a distinction between having emotional responses and observing them, but remaining unswayed by them, versus not having any emotional response, except for love, which is not really an emotional response as we think of emotional responses, but you could consider it an emotion, if you will. But then you have to understand it's sort of a different category than what you typically call emotions. This also hints at the difference between what I typically teach and hint at as a possibility for a human being versus how a lot of shadow workers the world over try to sort of kick this in the nuts for claiming that this is even possible because they call it bypassing, because they believe you can never be free from emotions, that you can only work with them or bypass them, but you can't truly transcend them. And that's simply not true. People idolize emotions so much. Their whole thinking and reasoning and planned purpose in life are reactions and strategies in response to their emotions, whether consciously or unconsciously. As a result, people are fairly blinded and inevitably self-centered. Anyway, so awesome topic. I mean, we'll digest some of this a little bit more with you. We'll dissect some of it more. We'll break it apart. And let's just talk about, first of all, what are emotions? According to my view, I suppose, according to our view. And what is the purpose of emotions? Now, in some of the other sessions, as we talk about different topics, like some of our worldly problems or issues or difficulty in communicating and harmonizing as one species, what you see is that something that's typically in the way is a lot of bias and a lot of insistence upon our points of view, and a lot of warfare. Warfare is always about my point of view is right, your point of view is wrong, some version of that most often. And again, politics is the same game where we're just being baited in creating separation between each other and fighting wars and all that stuff. Psychological wars. Anyway, I mean, the list goes on and on. Just look at humanity as it's operating. Right now, it's especially amplified. What if every human being on this planet overnight suddenly got downloaded like Trinity in the Matrix? Got downloaded the guidebook as to how to understand emotions, what their purpose is, and how to utilize emotions when they arise. And you'll find that my view is pretty much 180 degrees opposite to the conventional usage of emotions. And so let's get into this. The purpose of emotions, as I see it, and feel free to chip in and ask questions and give your own thoughts on this, or represent people if you think what I'm saying is not clear and needs to be broken down a little bit more. Emotions are guidance, period. When we have an emotion, it is guidance for the most part. I mean, we could argue that there is chemical reactions that are set off, and there's like PTSD reactions, sudden trauma that you don't even seem to think about anything, but it just grabs you by the gut, so to speak. Again, different chemically induced type of emotions and stuff. But let's just say that for the most part, your everyday emotions, and I would include PTSD into this, but your everyday emotions are guidance. So what are they guiding us into? And what's the nature of positive versus negative emotions? If we can really understand when we have a negative emotion and when we have a positive emotion, why it is either a negative or a positive feeling, that can also be very helpful in navigating that experience in a balanced way, in a wise way. So again, emotions are guidance, and they are guiding us to let us know whether we're on or off track, on or off truth, on or off our alignment. Now, this kind of implies that there is some kind of a deeper intelligence that is doing this guiding, that there's some power, some intelligence, some process, some blueprint, some substance, some foundation, some essence, some kind of intelligence that is doing this guidance, because clearly we're not doing it. We're just having an emotion and we're reacting to it, creating another emotion. We're reacting to it, creating another emotion. So while we can attempt to control our emotions, we're not doing the guidance part very clearly, right? Very clearly, we are not the ones who are consciously trying to guide us, like, oh, let me have anger right now so that I can guide myself back into peace or love. We're not thinking that way. We're just reacting to what is, not understanding why we're feeling anger. So emotions are here to guide us back into alignment. That's my conclusion after many, many years of digging and investigating. And they're always trying to guide us back into alignment. They're always trying to guide us back to the truth. And so, yes, there is this intelligence. There is this, and maybe the best way to visualize this is if everything is one, which it is, ultimately everything is one beingness, one essence, one substratum, one root, one consciousness, one isness, one beingness, the one infinite creator, one source. If there is only one, and let's use the image, the visualization of an ocean as representing oneness. The body of water, that is the ocean, represents oneness. So all the water on the planet represents oneness. Now, this water has many forms, many shapes. But okay, let's keep it simpler. Let's say, actually, yes, the ocean is what represents oneness. Now, this oneness has many different waves, has many different expressions, many different currents, both in the deeper areas of the ocean as well as the surface level, etc. There's all kinds of currents, all kinds of forms and shapes and what have you. But ultimately, the ocean is one body of water. If a portion of that body of water starts moving against the current of the rest of that body of water, it's going to feel it. There's going to be a friction, right? There's going to be an oppositional force. There's going to be a tug. There's going to be some resistance. That's what emotions are. It's the individual as part of the oneness trying to operate against the oneness, trying to operate against the truth of its whole beingness, of its wholeness. It's the individual being insistent upon a belief, a thought, a perspective that has a vibration that is non-consonant, that is non-harmonious, that is non-true. That's not true. That's not in alignment with the truth of existence, of the wholeness of its beingness. That's why any type of thought or perspective that we carry that has any type of tone or feeling or belief behind it along the lines of non-wholeness or non-completion or non-perfection or non-worthiness or non-value is experienced as negative, is experienced as painful. Just like when this little wave thinks it's a good idea to go against the current and swim back to the other shore, when the entire ocean is moving in the direction of shore A, and the wave suddenly has been trained to think that it's best in its best interest to try to make its way back to shore B, which is 2,000 miles from shore A, then it's going to experience a whole lot of pushback, a whole lot of resistance, a whole lot of friction, as it's basically counteracting its own true will as the wholeness, as the ocean. So now you have two currents that are bumping into each other. One that is unstoppable, which is the wholeness one, the truth one, and one that is an illusion, but that is persisted in until a point of exhaustion or frustration or despondency or hatred or suicide or warfare or getting interested in politics. It's one of the results of frustration. So in the analogy of the wave trying to move against the current of the truth, of the wholeness, the movement of wholeness, the rhythms of wholeness, the currents of wholeness, and that I call that truth because truth is the wholeness, the oneness of all things. It's the wholeness of your beingness, contains the truth, is the truth. Our thoughts so often contradict wholeness. They're about separation, polarity, opposition, again, hatred, separation, you versus me, greed, and so forth. So a lot of these beliefs, or also a prime one is, I'm not worthy, or I'm not valuable, or I don't have enough. There's lack everywhere. I got to fend for myself. This is a big, bad, dangerous universe, and I'm a little pawn in this play, and I need to defend myself as separate from the whole, and so forth. We have so many thoughts like that, so many lack beliefs. I typically summarize them as lack beliefs. Sometimes I say the only source of suffering is a lack belief. Go to the root of any suffering emotion, and you'll find you have some kind of belief that something is lacking or could be lacking, whether it's being alive, existing, fear of death, or the belief that you can't fulfill your dreams, fear of unfulfilled potential, or the stress of I should be doing something because otherwise I won't fulfill my dreams. Or, I mean, so many examples, but any negative emotion at the core, you can find some kind of a lack belief. In other words, a belief that goes against the current of wholeness, against the rhythms of truth, against the rhythms of the one infinite creator, which is what we're inseparable from. So, as a result of this little wave that you've labeled by a certain name, insert your name here, you figured out something, or so you thought. In all our beautiful ignorance, we thought we knew. And every time we think we know, that equates to thinking that we know better than the one infinite creator. There's no way around it. Every time that we think we know, we actually think, in some version, to some degree, we think that we know better than the wholeness of our beingness. That's why when Adam and Eve ate from the apple of the tree of knowledge, they got expelled from paradise. They lost the wholeness. They lost the awareness of wholeness because they started to gain knowledge. Anyway, that's my interpretation. And we do this. We accumulate knowledge. But where do we accumulate knowledge? It starts with mommy and daddy for most children, not all children. But it starts with our environment regardless. And we start to gain knowledge. Knowledge starts to be imparted into us, superimposed upon us. It starts to be imprinted upon us. Through example, through subliminal messaging, through electromagnetic conditioning, through environmental conditioning, and all that. So we become conditioned to believe and think certain things or acquire knowledge. As a result of this knowledge, we now have beliefs and perspectives that seem to define us as an individual, that seems to define us as a separate entity. And now based on this knowledge, we think we know what's best for ourselves. We think we know what is good, what is bad, and so forth, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial, what should be avoided, and what should be acquired, and all that. So out of this independent sense of knowing better than God, knowing better than the wholeness of the intelligence that is widely available to us, that is freely at our disposal at every single second, if only we knew how to access it. But it is available, just like the ocean is available to the wave at all times, because a wave cannot exist apart from the ocean, and it never has. It is ocean, in essence, in truth. It is the wholeness of the ocean. Same with us. We are the wholeness of God, the wholeness of oneness, the wholeness of source, the wholeness of this one infinite intelligence. We can't separate ourselves from this infinite universe of intelligent existence. Even if we tried as hard as we could, we couldn't. We're made of it. It is what we are. So if we have a thought that goes against this fabric, this rhythm, this knowledge, this true intelligence, then there's going to be resistance between us and ourselves, between a portion of God and God as a whole. And that friction point, that resistance point, that where these two seem to contradict each other is where emotions are born. So emotions are nothing but the result of our arrogance. Emotions are nothing but the result of eating from the tree of knowledge. Intense suffering is nothing but the insistence upon our knowledge when it is being challenged. Warfare, battle, opposition, politics is nothing but insistence upon our knowledge as if it is better than the wholeness, the knowledge of wholeness, even when we're presented with an alternative view, potentially a more holistic view, or simply when our views are challenged. But we insist upon the belief we already have. That's when our suffering goes through the roof. It's when something happens, we have a definition for what is happening. For example, this person betrayed me, or this is unfair, or the 1% is owning my life and I can't do anything about it, and whatever. There's so many out there. So pick your favorite one. Pick the one that you insist upon most, perhaps. And look, at every time you suffer more, it's because you insist more upon your own knowledge, independent from the Creator, not connected to anything else but your own story, imparted, infused into you by other people. You didn't grow up believing in this point of view until the age of 3, 4, 5, and onwards. When you were 2.5 years old, you didn't have the belief you have today about being betrayed, about the 1%, about this and that. As a result, you didn't suffer of it. Ignorance indeed is bliss in many ways. Although, you're not going to understand exactly what I'm saying here. It's going to be misconstrued. But anyway, ignorance, as in not knowing, as in openness to not know, is bliss. Knowledge, and insisting upon that separatist knowledge, is suffering. So the friction point between God and your argument with God, which is what any thought that makes you suffer is, it's an argument with God. It's you arguing for your case against the wholeness and the perfection and the completion and the direction and the guidance and the wholeness, the truth of God, the truth of all that is, the truth of the one infinite creator, the truth of your own nature, your own true self. The truth of your own true self is being contradicted by your greatly limited conscious thinking mind. But yet you insist upon that consciously thinking mind's perspective so much, even when presented with the fact that it's not true, or with the possibility that it's not true, or it's simply challenged by something you notice. Now, that's what we call a trigger. Now this perspective is triggered. You had it all the time, but you were distracted by the puppies and the Teletubbies and your children and your neighbors, and suddenly something enters your field of awareness that reminds you that, oh yeah, I have this belief that it's worth fighting for. Okay, so this belief arises, it's triggered. And now you have another opportunity to let it go, to soften it, to understand it, to accept it, to find the antithesis, to find the opposite polarity and balance that shit out and harmonize it. Let it rest in this one love and light based awareness that you are, that you have. Or to further dig your heels in and insist upon it more and find more enemies to fight to prove your independently acquired ignorance posing as knowledge point of view. And by all means, go ahead, but you'll find you'll suffer more and more because the friction increases between you and God. This is why it's guidance. It's trying to teach you to return to the wholeness that you are. Why do you think babies are typically so happy? Because their conscious minds are not yet contradicting the wholeness. So they're causelessly joyful. Babies are causelessly joyful for the most part. If they have physical complications or cramps or whatever, then they'll be showing physical signs of that. But at their foundation, the vast, vast majority of babies are, more often than not, in a state of constant sort of bliss and joy and contentment and peace and wholeness. Now, this is not the same perfected or mastered or fully activated or actualized wholeness that the enlightened sage or master enjoys, but it is a sort of latent version of that. It's a sort of a representation of it. It's a microcosmic version of that. It's an unrealized, natural, quasi-conscious, unconscious version of that. So it functions as an analogy. If you look at a baby and you see how causelessly joyful they can be, they're not busy thinking about politics or right or wrong or oppression and suppression and so forth. They're not insisting that they're not worthy to exist. They don't question their worth to exist. They don't think about how their dreams are not going to come true. They don't think about how they lack money in the bank account to do what they want to do. Therefore, they're not insisting upon anything that goes against the rhythms of God, which currently is manifest in the material third density plane as your physical environment. But that's part and parcel of the symbolization of your consciousness, having a next step arise to place its feet on in this vast space of empty infinite oneness. So materialization is a way to taste ourselves in physical form, in experiential form, to get a reflection of who we are and where we stand with our consciousness and what our biases are and what we wish to learn in this lifetime, and so on and so forth. The baby is not opposing this yet, for the most part. Therefore, it's experiencing its natural wholeness. It's transparent to its natural wholeness. It has not yet eaten the apple from the tree of knowledge of I know this, I know that, this is true, this is false. It's not arguing with God. It's not creating opposition, and it's definitely not digging its heels in.
What I think a lot of people will say to this so far is that, like, of course they want to go back and just feel like a baby and just not pay attention to what's going on in the world and not take a stand for anything. But they have to. They have, like, for the sake of all the lives that are being threatened, they have to pay attention to what's going on in the world, and they have to take a stand and fight for what they believe in.
Why? So you can copy that suffering onto others? Like, fight for what you believe in? Like, I believe in this, so why don't, and it's caused me lots of suffering and resistance and insistence and disease. So I want to make sure everybody knows that this is the truth, so they can also suffer. Why fight for what you believe in?
Well, people start to fight for what they believe in a environment where everyone else is already fighting for what they believe in. So it's not that they know the alternative is, oh, if I don't fight for what I believe in, it's just completely peaceful and we're living in utopia. It's like everybody's out there fighting for what they believe in. I now have to fight for what I believe in to have a shot at changing the world or making a difference. And going back to feeling like a baby and thinking and just ignorantly blissing out while the world is going to shambles would be completely irresponsible.
Well, I'm saying this from a more of an end game perspective of having followed this thread that I'm beginning to lay out in this podcast. But when you follow this thread, you might end up saying something similar to this, which is you'd be surprised how effective it would be at changing the world if everyone became ignorant again, like a baby, innocent, blissful, happy for no reason, but other than giving up its insistence upon all of its points of view and its perspectives and unburdening itself by unknowing everything that it's been accumulating throughout its life in terms of perspectives and concepts. And I understand most people equate this to giving up their free will or giving up their rights or giving up their intelligence and like becoming a dumber version of themselves. But I think I'm smarter than I ever was before as a result of this process. It may not seem like, it doesn't seem like I've unknown the things that I've known, because I can talk about all kinds of concepts and topics and have a fairly intelligent dialogue most of the time if I want to. So it doesn't mean that we lose our capacity for intellectual capabilities. It just means that there's no insistence. There's no energetic, emotional insistence. We don't need belief systems for the most part. In the ways that people use belief systems, we don't need that in order to be happy, to be functional, to be wise, to be smart, to be clever, to be balanced, to be loving, to be caring, to take care of things, to prevent certain things from happening, to ensure other things do. All that is logical and common sense. What we mix up is we think intelligence means emotional charge. We think it means emotional content. We think that intelligence means we have to fight something, we have to believe in something, we have to feel the pain of it, and so forth. What we don't. And I'm only saying this because I have suffered a lot in my own psychology. So that gave me a perfect opportunity to dissect it and to get to the bottom of it. So I'm not saying it from a state of not knowing what it's like to be completely lost in an emotional tunnel of darkness and depression and what have you. I know what that's like, and so I understand, but it's not the solution, and it doesn't lead to intelligence, and it doesn't lead to happiness, and it only leads to more warfare. So for me, from the place that I'm looking at things from currently, my current state of being, I'd say you'd be surprised how effective it is if people become more baby-like. Energetically, it doesn't mean you lose all capacity. Like, oh, what's it? A grocery store? I've never seen a grocery store before. Common sense is still available. Your conceptual memory data bank is still available. But the way that you approach it is from a state of innocence, not knowing, not being so confident in what you think you know, being more confident in the openness that there is much more intelligence available, and all you have to do is be absolutely open to it and receptive. And you can't be receptive if you think you know what you know is the truth. That's insistence. That's digging your heels in. That's creating the resistance between the wave and the rest of the water surrounding it. So again, the intelligence of the rest of this intelligence that surrounds us and permeates us, unseen, metaphysically speaking, is, again, that friction is what's generating emotions. So every time I insist upon a point of view that's not in alignment with the truth of the intelligence of something that far supersedes, the intelligence of something that far exceeds my rational intellectual capacity. Because I didn't create the stars with my conscious mind. I didn't use my intellectual conceptualizing capabilities and put planet Earth in its perfect orbit, right? Did you? Maybe. I don't know that. Good. Do you? No. So, right, have limited, all we have, what we call intelligence, is simply the ability to respond to what we see in a third dimensional way, sometimes fourth dimensional to a degree, and react and respond and form images about what we perceive. All we can do is react to this current manifestation that we have. And then we believe in that so much that we're blinded to the fact that that's not really the source of intelligence. It's not really the way to be intelligent. The way to be intelligent is to be a conduit, to be a vessel, to be empty of our own knowledge, to not eat the apple from the tree of knowledge, to stay innocent, to stay in the state of perpetual humility, inward humility and outward humility, to the point where this intelligence can begin to inform us, through us, because we become an empty vessel. We become a wave that's not resisting its direction. And so it's reaching the shore in perfect timing. Every emotion is in perfect rhythm, in rhythmic harmony with its wholeness. Wholeness is intelligence. Separation is dumbness or ignorance. And it's causing emotional, psychological, and physical pain. Because we act based on this emotional energy. And then we inflict our emotional energy in the form of physical energy towards others because we don't know how to deal with it. Because we think we know what we know. We think we're right. Righteousness is humanity's greatest burden and obstacle at this point. So innocence is exactly what we need. Unknowing what we know is exactly what we need. So first step is to pay attention, to understand that what are emotions? It is guidance. What's the purpose of emotions? It's to guide you back into alignment. So what is emotional energy? It's literally the friction of your own insistence. Therefore, its purpose is guidance back into a non-friction state, a harmonious state, a state where all your frequencies of your physical body and your subtle energetic bodies, or some people call it your aura, and beyond that even, for all those to start vibrating. As Nikola Tesla said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. It's like that. We're all vibrating. There's all wavelengths in all these bodies, all these states. And so if we relax, if we stop insisting and fighting, then all this energy becomes available, all this healing, all this wholeness, all this acceptance, all this love, all this bliss, all this causeless intelligence begins to be operational in us. We don't have to pre-know anything. We don't have to premeditate anything. We arrive at the scenes and instantly things are understood, and intuitively we are guided to do this or say that. Infinite intelligence is always available if the wave is not trying to separate itself using its own knowledge, creating this bubble around its head. That's literally how I see people. People think I'm being metaphorical. No, literally. When I walk in the streets, in the matrix, I see people and I see bubbles around their heads. And I see, it's like this screen. It's kind of like on their phone. They're just interacting with the phone screen. But beyond that, even if they put down their phone, they're still looking at their bubble. of concepts and ideas and constant thoughts and knowledge. They're not actually available. They're not aware of the intelligence. They're not aware of their source. They're not aware of why they exist. They're not aware of the fact that they even exist. They're only aware of stimulus, of sense perceptions, of preconditioned thoughts. And so, of course, you can't. You're an automatic robot. I could read you and I could do this, boop. That's why I can be a co-creator of experiential occurrences from that state, as Ra describes. Because if you're not emotionally swayed or swayable by a situation, because you've learned from that situation and you've mastered that situation and you've mastered your self-awareness in that state or with that topic, you can now become a co-creator of experiential occurrences instead of just a reactor to things. You can actually design, and from this intelligence, you can navigate things and you can truly begin to help people and kind of initiate the same catalytic awakening in people, or simply mirror who they are. We're all mirroring each other all the time, but all our mirrors are greatly distorted, like I said in one of the other podcasts. Basically, the mirror is in high demand because it can reflect things in a much less distorted fashion. So when you become more like a mirror, meaning when your biases are cleared out and your emotional energies are balanced and the opposites and the polarities are harmonized, and you've become innocent again, you've unknown things that you believed you had to know and insist upon, not only do you feel happy and whole because you're no longer resisting the truth of your wholeness, your beingness of God, your oneness with God. Now this intelligence begins to be able to utilize this body and this mind as mirrors that are less and less distorted. So therefore you can co-create experiential occurrences and be of service to others simply by reflecting. It's not something you premeditate upon. How can I trigger this person into greater awareness? No, it happens on the spot. I see you, I notice your bubble. It's got this leakage in it, it's got that pathway in it, it's got this pattern of probabilities. If this happens, you're going to go here, then you're going to think that, then you're going to dot, then this is most likely. Then there's a choice point and a splitting off. At that point, she could either choose this or that. So it's like a chess game that is just available to you. It's not premeditated. There's no intention behind it. I don't have an intention for you other than your well-being, because we're one. It's the same wholeness. So any wave who has realized its wholeness and is now flowing in harmony with the rhythms of that oceanic oneness will naturally be able to see when other waves are ignorant of that, and because knowledge is ignorance, and ignorance is true knowledge, or innocence is true knowledge. So from that innocence, you feel those sort of separate pods. You see the bubbles of separatist thinking and false independence from God. And it's just clear to you because what's backing you up is the intelligence of the Creator, the intelligence of the wholeness. There's only so much intelligence you can ever possibly have if you're trying to think for yourself on your own 2 feet as an intellectual, separate, physical, Newtonian physicist or neurologist or skeptic or atheist or smart person or intellectual or academic or PhD.
Or activist.
Or activist, good one. Or politician. We're all essentially perfect and whole and intelligent, but we're covering this up with a bubble of false independent thinking. Therefore, we lack all the availability of that intelligence in each moment. Once you do, you'll start to see people like bubbles around their heads. Well, you see them as wholeness, but then you see that they don't experience their wholeness because of this bubble. And then you can become a mirror of that and become, therefore, a co-creator of experiential occurrences, as Ra puts it. So now we've established, at least my view, on what emotions are. Emotions is friction between you and you, between the whole you and the self-asserted you, the believed in you, the egoic you, the mental you. When there's a disagreement in the mental you towards the wholeness of you, there's a friction point where these two waves interfere. You're never going to win from the wholeness vibration. You're never going to beat God in a debate. You're just not. But you try. We try for 40, 50, 60 years until we die exhausted and miserable in some way, shape, or form. Unless we learn and become innocent. That's why the happiest grandparents are those mild, innocent grandparents who are not out there holding signs trying to fight other people. There's a mildness there. There's an acceptance of things the way they are. They have learned to relax their ego into greater transparency to this intelligence that fuels everything. Now, the sooner you can learn this, the happier of a life you can live, and the more beneficial you can be, and the less harm you can do to others.
Such a key point.
So that friction point is what generates the emotion in our system, because our energy system is vibration. The universe is vibration. God is vibration. Most essential form is the vibration of oneness, of wholeness, of truth, of completion, of perfection. If we think something with our personal vibrations, our little location of this individuated body-mind, and we start to vibrate in a way that is jarring, that's not consonant, that's not in harmony with the wholeness that permeates us and surrounds us and fuels us and gave birth to us. See the ungratitude also in the act of independent thinking and insistence. The lack of gratitude. The wholeness created me, but me as the separate one will now know better and will fight for hundreds and thousands of years trying to prove I know better than that which gave birth to me and that which placed Earth in its orbit and all the other trillions of planets. But I know better, and I'm going to prove it to myself and my other selves and the universe and God. So see that the insistence is lack of gratitude, and it creates the friction between a personal vibration and the wholeness vibration that animates everything, that permeates everything. It's like a Wi-Fi signal that's available everywhere throughout creation. And it's the law of one Wi-Fi. If you were to be able to dial it on your phone or look up the Wi-Fi, it's called law of one. It's called oneness. It's called perfection. It's called wholeness. It's called your true self. It's called wake up, motherfucker. It's got different names, but it's the same Wi-Fi station. There's only one router in creation.
What's the password?
The password, Kelly. Well, what do you think the password is?
I don't know.
It's got multiple passwords.
You
probably
don't know.
I don't. Oh, nice. I don't know the password. Yay, that's the password.
Yeah.
I don't know the password. It's the password. That's great. The gateway to love is knowing that you don't know. It's the first step. Humility, surrender, gratitude, appreciation. So this Wi-Fi signal is present throughout. It's the substratum. It's the very essence of all of creation. We are part of that. We're an expression, an extension. We're a little fingertip of this whole body of wholeness, of perfection, of this infinite expanse, of the one infinite creator, expressing itself in the illusory form of this vivid imagination of creation. This super intelligent, illusory structure of perceptions upon dimensions, and so forth. We didn't do that with our physical brains, so let's stop trying to compete with that and make all these little things so big. Relax, get back in touch with that Wi-Fi signal, increase your connectivity. You know, how many dots do you have? How many? Increase that so that your upload and download speed to the motherboard of creation,
Right.
the intelligence, is better. You have a greater bandwidth of intelligence. But the more you know, the smaller your signal, because you're farther away from source and you feel more pain and you think you know more and you start fighting and causing harm energetically all across this world. And you're deluded. And the more that you relax your insistence upon your own beliefs and biases and knowledge and righteousness and political views and how wrong people have been to you and how wrong the system is and all that stuff, then you're not available for that signal to move you intelligently. Your upload and download speed and processing speed is very, very slow. Like I said in the other podcast, your refresh rate is very, very slow. You got to be present. To be present, you got to forget everything you think you know. Otherwise, you're in memory and you're in processing mode. To be present is to be available to this intelligence, to be opened up to you. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. I think we've covered this, or the subtopic, which is, so the friction point causes emotional energy. At the very point where we resist creation, we generate emotions. The purpose of that is intelligent. It is to guide us back into alignment, to guide us to greater enlightenment. So now how to utilize emotions, how to understand and interpret emotions, and how to utilize them to fulfill their purpose, the purpose being enlightenment, the purpose being mastery, the purpose being love and surrender and unity and harmony. Therefore, intelligence and true knowledge.
When you're talking about the friction, are you referring to both positive and negative emotions? Or just emotions in general?
So, negative emotions very distinctly show us that what we're thinking is essentially it's wrong. To really summarize this, is that when you feel bad, you know that something in your perspective, in the way that you're seeing things, in the way that you're looking at things, in the way that you're interpreting things, in the way that you're defining and labeling things and understanding them, which is a vibration. That perspective in your mental body is a vibration, and it goes against the Creator's infinite intelligence Wi-Fi signal, which inundates you, permeates you, is ever present. Like you're in a bathtub full of intelligence. You're swimming in it, and every movement you make is going to have some resistance or not, depending how much you go with the flow of the ocean. There's not going to be resistance at all, or there's going to be lots of resistance. So that's a negative emotion when there's a lot of resistance, right? Mm-hmm. Now, positive emotion is the brief moments of relief that we get from our resistance-based belief system or paradigm, because we've generated, because a lot of even positive thoughts still have at their root some kind of a lack belief. Mm. So really, you could say all emotions are negative in a sense, or have a negative root. Otherwise, they wouldn't be emotions. They would be love, bliss, sense of wholeness, a sense of intelligence, a sense of perfection, a sense of love, unconditional, all-seeing love. Anything short of that is a negative emotion, essentially. Even though we call it a positive emotion, but we call it a positive emotion because we've trained super negative emotions into a paradigm, into a layered structure, a foundation of building, an architecture of negative thoughts. So we're used to being in a constant state of arguing with God and denying ourselves a sense of love and wholeness and perfection and bliss. And now when we have a thought that is a little bit less negative, we call it a positive thought that comes with a positive charge. So, which is good. It's a good direction to follow. Don't get me wrong. It's a good direction to follow to an extent, but it's good to understand that it only seems to be a positive emotion because it brings you relief from the heavier resistance towards God. So any thought or perspective that you can reach for that is has less of an argument, less of an insistence upon knowing something against the way of things, against the wholeness. A thought that is perhaps like, oh, I can do this. I can't, if I work for 20 years, I can fulfill this dream. That's a negative thought. But it feels positive in comparison to, oh, I'm here with this big dream and I'm not skilled enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have opportunity enough. I was born in the wrong village and to the wrong parents and da. That's more solidifying in a negative sense. That's more anti-God in its thinking than the thought, I can do it. So now we have a brief window that opens that allows for that breeze of perfection to flow through a little bit. We open that window a little bit somewhere in our consciousness. We become a little bit more transparent to the truth of things, the actual bliss, the perfection, the wholeness, the true virtue, the true value, the perfection, the completion that we already are. We have a thought that mimics to some degree completion, at least as a possibility. Infinite possibility is another thought of the Creator. So anytime you think in terms of infinite possibilities, you're dancing in greater harmony with intelligence. That's why I say that skeptics can only be so happy. Skeptics can only be so intelligent. They can be as intellectually trained. They can have an IQ of 210. But as long as they don't ditch their skepticism of the Creator and creation, at some point, they cannot be happier and therefore not more intelligent as a whole being. They might be smart, clever, but so Because at the foundation, God's thought is everything is possible. That's one of God's thoughts, to put it sort of in a simplistic terms. It's not like God is there thinking, oh yeah, everything is possible. But you get the point. One of God's thoughts, or a thought that is commensurate with the truth of creation, is infinity and therefore infinite possibilities. Therefore, everything is possible. So someone who is steeped in that faith that everything is possible, which a skeptic typically doesn't do, therefore is with greater intelligence and with greater joy and with greater bliss, because its emotional energy is not triggered as much. It doesn't have as much emotion, therefore it has more love. It doesn't have as many distracting emotions and feelings. And make no mistake, intellectuals have a lot of feelings. Intellectuals have a lot of emotions stacked up on top of each other to the point of suffocation, to where all they're conscious of is the intellectual layer. But they're very deep feelers. That's why they shut off and became intellectuals at some point. Because it's too much and you can't figure it out. And so, I'm not saying all intellectuals are unhappy, because there is degrees of happiness there. It depends on their transparency, their humility, their openness. There's a lot of factors. But point in case, infinite possibilities is one of those thoughts that make one more transparent to the vibration of the ocean, to the rhythms of the ocean, and not go against it. So every time we have a thought that is more positive than what we're used to having, we feel relief from our constant sense, our constant paradigm of thinking, and therefore feeling. Because at the root of every feeling is a belief, a thought, a definition, something we believe is true. So good investigation is, what must I believe is true in order to have this feeling? I couldn't have this feeling about the situation if I didn't have this belief about the situation, this definition, this angle, this perspective, this point of view. What must I believe is true? What must I believe is true in order to have this feeling elicited when this and that happens, when I have this catalytic occurrence? So people can practice that on their own. I teach it in my teachings and so forth. TrinfinityAcademy.com gives some lessons on that too. It's all free. So really, in essence, there are no positive thoughts and emotions. From the point of view of the one infinite creator, every thought is an argument with God. And this is why the truly blissful ones, the true sages, the most enlightened masters of all time, have always hinted, at least in their higher level teachings, because they teach for individuals from all levels. Most teachers do anyway, not all. And therefore they say different things, can seem to contradict, but at their higher level teachings, it is about no longer being the mind, no longer being with thoughts, no longer associating with thoughts at all. And to a human being who has trained themselves to only see the sense organs and only see the thoughts of the 3D occurrence, to them it's like a death. But if you gradually practice this, it's like you're coming alive. And it's a death to be in this bubble of thinking that you know what you know. It's absolute lack of awareness of true life. It's a suffocation. It's I can't breathe. And nobody can breathe at this time in our planet. Hardly anyone can breathe. So that was a beautiful expression from our unconscious. We can't breathe because we think too much, and we riot too much, and we argue too much. We believe too much in our own thoughts. We insist. We go against the flow of the Creator. If you're used to that state, if you have a thought that brings you relief, if there's something occurs that promises maybe it is possible. Oh, I could win the lottery. The first 3 numbers are already correct. And when you've believed for all of your life that you can't do what you want to do because you don't have the money and you're not worthy to make the money, and if you do make the money on your own, then you're an asshole for making the money because money is bad and people with money are greedy, and just one example of a negative thought pattern, then you're stuck in this limited paradigm of believing you can't fulfill your dreams because of this reason, that reason, and this reason. All arguments with God. That's why every one of these thoughts triggers a negative feeling, a depressing feeling, a static feeling, a slow-moving feeling. Turns water to ice. Of course, then people want to do drugs and drink too much alcohol and forget about their lives. Then ignorance becomes bliss in a negative sense, in an escapist way. Then spiritual bypassing becomes nice and all that. And positive thoughts now seem truly positive, even though from God's point of view, all thoughts are negative. But I don't mean this in a negative way, just to be clear. This needs some context or nuance. That's not to say that you should judge yourself for having thoughts because all thoughts are negative. It's just a fun way of seeing it. I think it's a fun way of seeing it. That from the Creator's point of view, every thought an individual has, and this is only one side of the coin, is an argument with God. Every perspective you hold on to is an argument with God. Now, at the same time, what God also sees, in my opinion, experience, is that every thought is an expansion of its illusion, an expansion of its way of knowing itself, an expansion of the creation. So it's also empowered. You're also empowered with that free will to think however the hell you want to think. But on your way back, like evolution, the evolution of the Creator has two flows, just like everything, a breathing in and a breathing out, an ebb and a flow, an expansion and a collapse, or an introversion. Same with creation. It expands, it becomes more and more extrovert, more and more outer. It evolves, and when it reaches the very threshold of how physical and how dense and how externalized and crystallized it can become, it starts to involve instead of evolve, you could say. It's an involution. It begins to happen. And so, similarly, at that point, you could say, okay, at this point, I'm going to have to investigate my thoughts. If I want to make my way back to this harmony with the Creator, this enlightenment, this unity consciousness, this oneness, experience my oneness with the wholeness of the ocean. If I want to know myself as the ocean, not just as the wave that's like bobbing on the water, depending on. If I want to know myself as the ocean, in all of it, as all of it, and then I have to retrace my thoughts. I have to minimize my thoughts, my insistence, my belief systems. I have to become purer and purer again, become more and more reflective of God's natural state, which is pure, blissful existence, awareness, aliveness, with no thoughts or ideas. It's freedom. It's still pure existence. You still exist. You don't die. You just gain more intelligence and more capacity, but at the same time, less desire for insistence. So it's a process of diminishing this insistence upon thinking. So from that perspective, you could say it's helpful to see all thoughts ultimately as contradicting God, but there's thoughts that contradict God less, and there's thoughts that contradict the Creator or intelligence more. The more you contradict the Creator, the more you suffer in your thinking. The more in your thinking that you align yourself with the way that the Creator would think if it thought, if it had the need for thoughts, such as everything is possible. You're infinitely worthy. I created you with a reason, with purpose. This is purposeful, and so on and so forth. Everything is possible. Abundance is the nature of reality. Love is everywhere in all beings. We're all one, the law of one, and so forth. Anytime we think thoughts that are more in alignment with that, we start to feel better and better and better and better. That's why the emotions is our guidance system. What do humans do? Very opposite. Right. So once we understand this, what do? We have a negative emotion and we go, our first reaction, once we're trained in this knowledge that I just expounded, if we're intelligent about it, the first response to a negative emotion is pause. Humans don't pause. That's already like, how dare you? We have to act on this emotion. So first step is pause and observe and inquire. Well, first of all, know if I have a negative emotion, I'm wrong. If you feel bad, you are absolutely, terribly, horribly mistaken about something. Do you really want to act on that? Do you really want to put that on your neighbor's lawn? Do you really want to feed that to your kids? Do you really want to believe that that's about your president? Do you really want to cut all ties with your dearest friends because of that? You're wrong. If you weren't wrong, you would feel amazing, but you don't. And most of us feel different shades of terrible all day long, alternatingly. But we've gotten Well, no.
there's truth. There's
such
truth to it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
maybe
so
I'm
tragic,
off,
but it's true.
so we build all these layers of negative thoughts, and we get so used to them that we think that's normal. But really, from the vantage point of bliss, we're in a perpetual state of different shades of pain and suffering. And from this pain and suffering, we try to change the world and each other and fight our way out of this box of emotional pain. So what does the sage do when a negative emotion would occur? If the negative emotion would occur, is investigate. First of all, know that something about the perspective is a residue taught to the sage by human beings. So, or let's just say someone who's intelligent about it, that understands that emotions are guidance, and that when I feel bad, it means I, in terms of my perspective, me as the perspective that I'm holding about this situation, is somehow out of alignment with the way that the Creator views this and the way that it's all flowing in perfect harmony and abundance and love and light. I'm not seeing that. Because I'm not seeing that, I'm going against a current that permeates me, that penetrates me, that surrounds me, that has given birth to me, to which I should be grateful, to which I want to be grateful, because I depend on it. I exist because of it. I am it. I want to listen to my greater self. Therefore, if I have a negative emotion about a situation, I know my perspective about it is wrong. That's the first step for an emotionally intelligent being. What's the first step for the average human being? And this is all because we've not been trained otherwise, okay? So don't blame yourself, but I'm going to exemplify it. If I feel a painful emotion, that means I'm right. That's my first response as a human being trained by other human beings. If I feel bad, I'm right. And you see this in behavior from kids onwards because they mimic us as parents. When I feel bad, I am right and something is wrong. No, you got it all backwards. If you have a negative emotion, you are wrong. And everything else is perfect. Because it's exactly there to mirror to you where you believe you're wrong. That's the catalytic experiential occurrences that mirrors can help you co-create for yourself, to help you accelerate it and explain it to you. But the whole universe is this mirror to your consciousness. So everything that's wrong about your environment, or so you believe, is actually the most perfect, pristine part of you. The thing that's off is your reaction to it. You believe in whatever you believe in. And that's what this teacher of your creation is trying to show you. So an emotionally unintelligent person responds to a negative emotion believing that it's right. So righteousness is the response of the emotionally unintelligent or untrained person. The emotionally intelligent person, or the being that's trained in emotional intelligence, their first response to pain or emotions is, somewhere my perspective is incomplete. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to look for the true source of that pain, no matter how tempting it is to lash out at my environment and other people and try to paste my pain onto other people and then call that being right or call that being just. It's a complete turnaround for a lot of people. If you hear this for the first time, you're going to need some time to digest this 180-degree turnaround. But I hope it's exciting to you if you see how much liberation there could be if you do understand completely the perspective that I'm trying to convey here. And so just listen to this multiple times till you get it. Apply it in your life. See how it's actually consistently operational and how everything I've shared is actually true. When you apply it, you'll see a consistency to it, an intelligence to it, a surrender that happens, a flow of energy that happens, a happiness that begins to flow, a possibilities that open up that you closed off to before, and so much more. Healing that starts to happen. Insight, transcendence, awakening intelligence, enlightenment, bliss, causeless joy, and so forth. So, most human beings who are trained in unintelligent ways, emotionally speaking, will believe they're right when they have an emotion and therefore will say something to other people based in that other people are wrong, or they will fight for something, but all based in this emotion. Now, don't worry, you won't lose the capacity once you become emotionally intelligent. You won't lose the capacity to know when someone else is infringing upon some other entity's free will, be it your own or your child or your partner or someone that you just so happen to be in a position to defend. And you have the capacity and the intelligence in that moment to justly defend that freedom, to defend that boundary of free will around each entity. You can start to actually see and sense that boundary. Before you can't really, because you're too filled with your own ideas and biases, because you insist upon wanting to live your own life in this infinite universe of bliss. You want to know it yourself. You want to know how to do it yourself. So then you got to deal with all the blind spots that you have that come from that. Now, if you open up emotionally and become intelligent, use emotions in an intelligent way and see them as guidance, and use them to reveal your own flaws in your own thinking and align them to God once again, to the Creator, to this intelligent source field. Then you can still defend what needs to be defended if it actually needs to be defended and it arises in your experience organically as an opportunity for you to be of service. And you've used it as a mirror to reflect to yourself your own biases, and you're aware of those biases when you're acting. So don't worry, you won't become a vegetable. You can still be an activist, perhaps. I guess in some senses I'm an activist. So yeah, I can be very passionate about justice in the right moment, when it occurs to me, when it happens right there in front of me, and when it's clear. I can be very passionate. I can be very cutting. I can be very slicing if I need to be. With a power and energy and an intelligence that is hard to describe. But it only happens when it's organically occurring in that sense. It's not sought out because I'm not fighting anything. So I wish that for you. And I think everyone would be majorly surprised how much the world would change if they got just this one principle of how to use their emotions. Instead of puking it out onto everybody because we believe we're right when we hurt, instead believe that you're wrong when you hurt. You're wrong about something. That should be the first step to humility. Is I feel the pain, that means my thoughts are out of alignment with my greater being, with the wholeness of creation. I'm somehow not seeing the truth of this. That's why my vibration is contradicting the vibration of truth, of oneness, of intelligence, of guidance, of my higher self, if you will, of God. And therefore, I'm feeling the pain. The emotion that I'm feeling is not because of the circumstance. It's because my thought of the circumstance is not vibrating in resonance with the Wi-Fi signal of this one infinite intelligence. I want to realign that so that I'm backed up in my actions and speech by this one infinite love and intelligence. Because I want my actions to come from this love and this intelligence. I don't want to be emotionally unintelligent. I don't want to be the cause of more suffering. So this takes practice and humility.
Well, one thing it makes me think of is this levels of energy model I've told you about before, where essentially there's infinite parallel versions of yourself or levels of energy that you could experience, frequencies. And the lowest is a victim mentality, and the highest is like the infinite or enlightenment, or I think they call it genius. But just how every single one of these is an improvement and includes the one below it. So and at each level of energy, so say the lowest level of energy, victim mentality, it feels like all of your memories reinforce it. Your future that you can predict reinforces it. That's all you have access to is that timeline. And same with the one above it, which is anger. All you have access to is that timeline, anger. Anger in the past, anger in the future. And each one incorporates more and more truth and understands the ones below it. So it's just so interesting listening to you talk about this, like how righteous people can feel at the lowest, least true levels of energy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like that victim, the most victimized, least true, most diluted level of energy is the one that actually feels the most righteous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, when you solve that paradox, let me know.
Oh, yeah.
I've scratched my head so many times, like being face to face with someone who is really in that victim consciousness and wanting nothing but to somehow help and aid and assist them. But just witnessing the self-abuse that they do and the abuse of me that they attempt, and how nothing, even the most loving, what I would consider intelligent, balanced approach, does not get through. Everything is already set and determined. They already know everything, and yet they suffer so much. It's the absolute example of the opposite of enlightenment is victim consciousness. It believes in everything that's not true about the creator, and therefore about that entity itself, because that entity ultimately is the creator, because where else would you have come from? So it's a being of infinite worth, infinite expanse, infinite perfection, infinite possibility, infinite love, infinite wholeness, believing the exact opposite of everything that's true about itself, and believing that it's absolutely right about it.
Right.
The victim state is the most righteous state. And there's different types of victim states. Some victim states are a little different, but most of the time, the victim states that I've found, they're very aggressive. They're actually very aggressive.
Right. Defensive. Like convinced.
I know
that I
better
am
than
worse.
God. I know better than everything.
Yeah.
So when you figure out a way to reach these people, let me know.
There's just it's like such a mess down there. That's one thing that I've just been aware of with all this activism recently. Some of the stuff that we say here on this podcast and like that other really intelligent, wise, balanced sources say, you'll hear from this like victim consciousness, you'll hear those same arguments. And it makes sense from their perspective. Like even I can listen to it and be like, oh damn, that's tough. Like I don't know how to get in there.
That's
Like
because your perspective includes their timeline, their perspective, right? That's why you can
totally.
empathize
Like
with it.
I've been there myself. I've felt.
And if you're not firm in your perspective, meaning in your higher level of consciousness, then it could even attempt to drag you
Totally.
down into the
Yeah,
mud,
it's seductive.
right? And that's the teacher for you in that
Nice.
case.
Even anger is an improvement upon victim mentality. And from anger, even just tolerance and complacency is an improvement upon anger and blame. So, but I think I see that in some of your reflections. It's like you'll get into the nitty gritty when somebody is in like a super low, like a victim mentality. Like you'll get down in there with them just to trigger them up like one notch, because there's no chance to get them to complete. I mean, not no chance, but it's super unlikely to completely break them open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like you said earlier, there's no premeditation for a mirror. So it's probably not even in your awareness until after the fact, sort of what you did and why you did it.
Depends on the complexity of the situation. Yeah, I either recognize it right on the spot and understand what's happening, either because I've experienced similar patterns with people before, similar dynamics, similar ways of reflecting, or I begin to understand it as it's happening. And in the more complex situations or novel situations that I haven't dissected yet before, like unique sort of psychologies or belief systems and layers and interactions between layers, then after the fact, after the action or the speech or the reflection, I'm still downloading into my intellectual capacity, kind of putting the dots together and seeing what was actually happening and being reflected.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's not premeditated. Yeah. Sometimes what's premeditated is holding back.
Oh, yeah.
It's like I'll feel that mirroring principle come up. And that's why, in a sense, I don't want to be among people too much, because I don't want to restrict that mirroring consciousness. But at the same time, in our current society, if I were to full on mirror, I get myself into trouble in the perspectives of others. And then it would not be a sustainable way of sharing the message, if that makes sense. It would be it'd be the passion of love for the sake of like allowing everything to happen and through me and reflect. But then it would be almost like a shooting the desire to be of service to others in the foot, sort of through a martyrdom or naivety kind of thing. And then you just, because the society has so many taboos and misunderstandings, and it doesn't have any appreciation for enlightened types of interactions, it doesn't have any context or understanding for that. I would just get myself into trouble, like energetically and whatever, logistically, which would cause the detriment of, and to some degree it has, I suppose, in minor versions, where this has been, some of these things that are misunderstood are then painted in a bad light, out of context, not understood. So I've gotten my fair share of that resistance and that being turned into a bad guy kind of thing by the public, because my reflections are not understood, and then separate things are pieced together and there's a story given to it. So in a sense, I have to premeditate how available I am in my true, natural, authentic state. That's why I don't hang out with that many people all the time, because I don't want to restrict what's natural, because that requires some kind of a premeditation. But at the same time, I don't want to be used as a mirror the whole time, because I don't think it's good for what we're doing, or the message, the longevity of the message.
You mean just because of your like physical body time, like you would burn out if you're constantly being used by a mirror? Is that what you mean?
Well, there's that, but no, there'd be so many occurrences that would be misunderstood and taken out of context. Right. That would be so bad for the image. The way that people paint it and interpret it would be so bad for the image that then it would diminish the ability for the message to reach those that actually are ready to integrate these types of teachings and this work within themselves, because it has such a bad rap at that stage that there would be no longevity to this message. So then I would only be helping that one person in their momentary reflection. And who knows even if they're worthy of that reflection, because most people don't even use it. Sure, seeds get planted all the time and that will grow into a flower later on. But the naivety of fourth density love is like, yes, I should always be available. I should always just do and give and give. And I'm still working that out within myself. I'm still ironing out the last remnants of that active sense of duty and service and total availability with no personal boundaries whatsoever. Because all is myself, right? And like, I'm yours. Like, this is your property. I don't care. Here, use it. Whatever needs to happen, whatever shape I need to take for you, by all means, use it. But then that's detrimental to all the other people that don't know this message yet, and that if all they hear is negative interpretations, then they wouldn't be open to this, perhaps. So there's a longevity to it in that regard, and there's a longevity also in my personal energy, because if you're constantly reflecting the mud, then there are periods where you have to cleanse yourself from the mud in order to once again be a clean mirror. If you do it all the time, it can get very exhausting. Yeah. Because it's not your native state, right? It's like you're fighting a war in a different country, and you're in a desert when you're used to the tropics, and you're just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting for. So it's kind of like that, and at the end you're like, holy fuck, who am I again? Like, what's real? What's my native? And you know it's not what you are, but then it's like, oh, you need that shower again. You need to come back home again. So I've learned to balance that and just not go too far into being available all the time for everybody that just comes around. And there's got to be a readiness. There's got to be sort of a natural alignment of the beings that come into my personal space that kind of deserve it, that have done the work, that understand the basics of the teachings, that understand how I operate as a mirror, and that can therefore interpret it in the way that actually serves them, and it sustains my ability to do what I do and be in my natural state. And like I quoted the other day, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, but Ramana Maharshi said something along the lines of, if you're foolish enough to teach those who are not ready, blame only yourself.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it for the world, though. Like, I wish that for humanity more than anything else. Just be better access to teachings like these. Less bias, more openness.
Yeah, they got to suffer some more, it seems, before they really want to change internally. Everybody wants to change externally, but it's because they still believe they're right when they feel bad. They're right about what they're thinking, about their circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
If they could change that to somehow, somewhere I'm wrong, have that humility, they could correct that flawed perspective. They could realign it to the wholeness, and therefore the intelligence would become available. They would see it from a higher dimensional point of view. They would understand it. It'd still be able to take action, but the action would be fruitful. The action would be intelligent, and it would come from a state of solutions, not a state from warfare and perpetuating your own insistence and your own point of view. But that humility needs to be there. And that's why these people suffer the most consistently, is because they're the most insistent. At some point, that suffering, which is guidance, it's love. Suffering is love. It's guidance. It's you're trying to escape. You're trying to go against the energy of all that is, the intelligence of all that is. That's going to hurt. If it wouldn't hurt, you would go off course and shoot outside of the universe and destroy your soul, because you'd never got the tug. You'd never felt the resistance. But because it hurts so much when you try to exit the oneness,
Nice.
ultimately that constant slap in the face will wake you up to the fact that you're wrong. You're wrong. You're fundamentally wrong in your perspectives. You're fundamentally ignorant in your ways of thinking and seeing. And you need a healthy dose of unknowing and a healthy dose of humility to come back to center. Blame only yourself. Then turn that self-blame into self-ownership and self-love and self-forgiveness. And then that self-forgiveness will teach you true knowledge, true self-knowledge. It will open you up to it. But you got to understand that you're wrong in your perspective. If you want healing, if you want happiness, if you want solutions.
So from a guidance perspective, the positive emotion is just it's not indicative that, oh, hey, you're here. Because I think a lot of people think that, okay, we need to go from feeling negatively to feeling positively. And once you feel good, they associate that with, okay, we're where we need to be now. And it's like, from this perspective, the feeling good is not like you're there. It's just a preview of what's really to come.
Nice.
Of the true bliss and the actual feeling of like your true state.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's still preview. I like that word. It's a preview. It's a glimpse. Because it's still cause-based, right? As long as it still has a cause, it's not yet the original happiness.
Yeah.
Is that also what you're pointing to when you say, like, we feel good, therefore we assume, okay, we're kind of there because of this or that circumstance, or now the world is good, or now my environment is good, therefore I feel good. We had a little follow-up dialogue, I think, in this thread here. So yes, someone else commented on my clarification. Love all this. Could you please clarify this for me? I'm not sure I fully understand what you mean when you say to transcend emotions. What I think it means is that it's not that you don't have emotions anymore, but don't experience these states. Oh, that you don't have emotions anymore and don't experience these states, but it means that you are no longer choosing to engage with your emotions by reacting to them, trying to resolve them, and you don't take them personally, but only responding to them with love and compassion. So that describes sort of an intermediary stage of, okay, so I'm having the emotional response still, and now I'm beginning to respond to my emotional response to the circumstance by responding to that with love and compassion and remaining kind of like a witness and being as unswayed by the emotion as I can be, as truthful and honest and self-observant as I can be, as loving as I can be, to try to understand them. But I responded, I mean you experience no emotional responses when I say transcending emotions. Remember, emotions are guidance. Guidance is needed because you're out of alignment. Or you could say because your perspective is removed from truth. This perspective is responsible for the emotional energy getting triggered as guidance. As such, emotions are not natural per se, although part of nature as all things are. Rather, they are the results of developing unnatural perspectives. Perspectives that go against the natural truths of creation. Just like you have no emotional feelings about the doorknob I just touched, so too you do not need to have emotional reactions to any circumstance. The only reason we don't feel constant love and unity and perfection, which is the truth, is because we hold egoic perspectives of things independent from how God sees life. Emotions are entirely the result of arguing with God and the way things are. And so it is possible, if one wants to strive for this with patience and earnest, honest self-awareness, to remember that all emotions are egoic, they are not right, which is how we often feel about emotions, that they're right, that we are right, which sustains our egoic perspective as separate from God, and as such continues the guidance system to guide us back with the use of painful emotions. As Ross said, this takes a lot of practice. And as they say as well, this is not indifference or objectivity, but a finely tuned compassion and love which sees all things as love. Therefore, catalyst no longer elicits an emotional response, other than seeing all things as love. And then someone said, thank you for this, so good. What about when we feel like we are experiencing positive emotions, like good feelings from our guidance towards alignment? Are these actually positive emotions, or are we just feeling the love and unity and truth? Then perhaps mislabeling these as positive emotions. I replied, they range from perspectives that are closely aligned to the truth. So the positive states, they range from perspectives that are closely aligned to the truth, and therefore our transparency to God generates the open window effect where the breeze of perfection is felt. 2, a less transparent version of positive emotions, where this breeze is more perverted with hope and or righteousness, distortions or filters. But if experienced without hope and righteousness, the positive emotions are more accurately a mislabeling of what's more accurately described as glimpses of love.
I love that, the open window effect.
So positive thought can temporarily open that window. So what do I mean with hope or righteousness as to distortions? So when you have a positive thought, but it's not really very transparent to God's love and perfection, but it's kind of that perverted positive thought that appears to be a positive thought and emotion. And it's helpful to go from negative to less negative, aka positive. But when it's perverted with hope, we can feel relief and positivity, but it's not the true glimpse of love yet, or the true glimpse of perfection or God yet, because it's really just the experience of a temporary antidote to what we've been creating for ourselves in terms of believing in lack and limitation and unworthiness and injustice and victimization. So now when we have a thought that is perverted with hope or righteousness, for example, let's say we believe we've been oppressed and now we're finally fighting back, and now the oppressor is on their knees and they're beheaded. That can be experienced as a positive emotion, right? Relief. Yeah, we won. But it's it's not really a glimpse into God anymore, but it's experienced as a positive emotion. because it is a glimpse of God, but it's perverted with righteousness in this case. And right before, the oppressor was on their knees and got beheaded, which brought the relief of God's love, very, very perverted through the filter of righteousness, rooted in a memory data bank of pain and worse emotions of oppression and suppression and victimization that are even farther removed from the way the Creator actually is, the way we actually are. Therefore, we feel more pain in the suppressed state, that now we're actually happy beheading someone that's on their knees because it represents to us winning or empowerment, or now things can be better for me, which mimics the way that we are. Things are good for us.
Oh, nice.
Things are abundant. Things are good and all pervasively possible. So now our perspective of what's possible for us, because we beheaded someone, opens up and is more closely aligned to the truth of Creator. Therefore, we resist less the ocean that we exist as part of. And we feel, therefore, less resistance and less negative emotion. And we call that relief or positive emotion. Right before the moment when the oppressor was on their knees and beheaded, there was hope. It was distorted, perverted with hope, where they almost got to the castle or the palace or wherever the oppressor was seated. And there was this 70% chance that this dictator or whoever the oppressor was going to be captured. So now there was this relief of, more is possible, hopefully.
Wow.
So that's the perversion of hope and the perversion of righteousness. Those are the negative emotions that are felt as positive emotions initially. But so that's the lower range of positive, what we call positive states. The higher range is where our thoughts are actually so aligned with the way that God thinks that it really is like opening a window and the breeze of perfection is felt in like a very pure way. But it's just a glimpse. It's just a portion of that bliss. And it's just temporary. It's just, and then the window shuts typically. But that at least is a purifying moment. Mm-hmm. It's a humbling moment, and we become more innocent, and we never forget that moment of true bliss and true love, because we were in innocent. We were in not knowing. We were like the baby, but now actualized, conscious as a mature adult. And all that is therefore leading to the end result, which is to not have any emotions. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not the goal for most people, because if it becomes the goal, then we start bypassing what is. The best thing to do is to attend to what is with the greatest degree of love and confidence as you can, understanding everything that we've laid out in this session. But yes, over time, with lots of practice, if diligently and properly applied, in a balanced and self-honest way, because we deceive ourselves in all kinds of ways, justify things, tell ourselves excuses. So we got to have such a desire for freedom and truthfulness and humility that we're willing to be absolutely honest with all of our lies and strategies and victimization perspectives and blame and shame and all that stuff. But assuming, it's rare, but assuming that someone is that earnest and honest and deliberate and desirous for true freedom, true truthfulness, true innocence, true love, then typically over a long period of practice, yes, the end result is that you'll feel less and less and less and less emotions, because you become less and less and less causal. You become more and more causeless. You become more and more like God, present, available, unbiased. And that's the mirror state, is when you're predominantly unbiased. With the great vast majority of topics in your life, you're unbiased. You no longer have an opinion on anything. Doesn't mean you cannot offer any intelligent perspectives. In fact, it's the only state from which you can offer intelligent solutions, because it's not the same state that created a problem. Mm-hmm. You're not fighting, you're not resisting, you're not opposing, you're not exacerbating, you're not insisting, you're not perpetuating, you're not amplifying, you're not energizing, and so on and so forth. You're not becoming the energy you're opposing. You're free. Therefore, absolutely, infringement of free will is happening over here. Let me, if it is in my place, in my time, if it's appropriate, if it's appearing to me and it's calling forth from this intuitive energy of this mirror state through the body and the speech, and it's dictating that I should say this right now, then I will say this, and I will say this with an intelligence and a perspective that those that are ready to hear can receive it if they want to. Their free will, but it will be offered through a mirror like that. But the mirror doesn't have an opinion on the matter, other than it's noticing that there's some form of an infringement happening of the free will from one entity to another. And by its very nature, it will move into an expression that could correct that if people wanted to receive that correction. And sometimes that might come with an action that just actually seizes the activity. But those are all hypotheticals, and it's case-by-case basis. You can't say for sure what's going to happen through such a state of consciousness. But rest assured, it's much more intelligent and balanced than anything that the average human being has access to, allows themselves to have access to. So yes, you'll be without emotional energy around the vast majority of topics. And where there is emotional energy, it's just another sign, and you do the practice again, and it resolves itself with practice, with understanding. And then your mirrorness becomes even more undistorted also when that topic or catalytic situation arises. That's why Ra says the objective is not for the effortless flow of good and bad emotions while you remain unswayed by them. No, the goal is far simpler, but takes a lot of practice. It's to simply be unswayed, period. Not to then still be in this like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this emotion and that emotion, but I'm just staying as the witness. Or I'm just going to do my shadow work, or I'm going to do this. Well, all good things. But if we're talking about the end of where this guidance is guiding us to eventually, and that eventually can be right now if we wanted to. But for most people, it's a process. But where is the guidance of emotions, all emotions guiding us to? It's the state of no emotions. Because when you don't need guidance, you don't need emotions. You're in perfect bliss, you're in perfect love, you're in perfect intelligence, you're with perfect harmony. So then all you feel is the harmony of oneness, the truth of oneness. You're feeling and seeing and being and breathing and speaking the truth, period. If that's all that you are attuned to, if you're constantly aware of that, then there is no need for guidance. Therefore, there's no emotions. Because what are emotions? They're guidance. They don't exist apart from being guidance. They have no basis. They're not just random things that we're born with. They're guidance, guiding us back to alignment. If we're in alignment, there is no emotion. If we're fully in alignment, there's only bliss and love. Or enlightenment. Oneness. Until that time, we need to witness our emotions, understand them, become less polarized by them, less biased, less opinionated about them, less righteous about them. Let them cancel each other out, the positives and the negatives. We contain everything from the rapist and the murderer to the holy saint that is generous and does everything for others. Every entity contains all these possibilities. We need to accept for all that and not fight things out in the world. We need to accept those, first of all, so that this newly found intelligence can let us know, can show us clearly how to operate and act to correct these things. And they will be corrected in absolute record time, in magical record time, if everyone were to relax their insistence upon their points of view. Think about it. It's even logical. If everyone would drop their points of view, what would there be to correct?
What would you say to someone that is attached to the intelligence that they already have and they know, to kind of encourage them to let go of that, or to feel okay to trust that they can let go of that?
I don't think I need to encourage them so much, because their guidance system is doing that for them anyway. So if you're tired of suffering, then that's your cue.
True.
If you're not, if you're ready for more, then go get them. Go hurt some more lives and distort some more possibilities and limit some more windows and make your pain other people's pain, and continue to pervert and insist upon your own pain and you're right, you're absolutely right. Continue to feel how right you are, and continue to get your fix, your self-gratification fix through how right you are and how oppressed you've been and how victimized you are and how wrong everybody else is except for you and how pure you are. By all means, continue to feel that pain. and idolize it as righteousness and gratification. But there is an end to that. And at some point, every entity gets exhausted by their own ignorance, by their own lies. So not up to me. But I could just say people can trust it. They want to, because it leads to bliss, joy, happiness, intelligence, skillful means, enlightenment, harmony, the ability to move mountains, to change the world, and so forth. But that's just my words. Doesn't matter if someone doesn't want it. And so they each have their own guidance system in place to guide them to the point of exhaustion until they do want it. And then they'll discover very similar things, everything I've laid out here, once they're open.
One thing I love that you said was that this is if you follow it all the way, like if you follow the emotional guidance system all the way, eventually this is what it would lead to, would be no emotions or being completely unswayed. Do you want to make a correction?
Well, just I want to reemphasize again that brings up for people a lot of time the image of being robotic or objective or indifferent. That's why Ra emphasized it, and I'm emphasizing it too, doubling down on that. It does not mean indifference. You feel everything. You care even more. You're so empathetic, but you feel everything as if it's happening to you. Every pain, every injustice, all that. You're not oblivious to any of it. But you have the courage to not believe you know what's right about it, and to allow that intelligence to act when it acts, and you see that the results are just far superior. Plus, you see that you're no longer adding to the energetic vibrational field with opposition and separation and disharmony. You're adding to the vibrational field of that universe, of that nexus of space-time, which we call Earth in this dimension and this particular collective consciousness, with vibrations of more harmony. And so you're supporting that and encouraging that. You're, in that sense, fighting for the truth by not fighting in the warfare of perspectives.
It does take courage too. Like that's the perfect word because it's a huge leap. Like Kelly was just saying, like it's a major paradigm shift to even consider going in the direction of becoming non-emotional or disregarding the like importance of your emotions and instead just using them as the guidance that they are.
Yeah. So they are important.
Right.
Right. So
as guidance, but not as information, not as data.
They're very unimportant when it comes. They're not significant in the way of indicating that you're right. They're very significant in indicating that you're not right.
Nice.
So guidance, yes.
Right.
So they're very important, otherwise they wouldn't be there. But yeah, they're not important. I get what you're saying. They're not important in the typical way people use them. Like I feel this, therefore I'm right, and this should change, and da.
Right. Anyway, what just stood out was how just this microcosm or this mechanism of you sort of taking something all the way, like this is how this works, and this is how it looks all the way at the end. Like if you take it all the way to complete balance. I mean, I think that's actually what you've done with your entire body of work. Like that's what your whole teachings are based on, is having taken something all the way. And that's why a lot of it feels so controversial and so disruptive and intimidating or threatening, is because it's like 6 leaps away from where people are ready to take their next leap. It's all the way to where the freedom is and where the clarity is and where the potential is and the solutions are. Yeah, love that. Yeah. I also had a question, but do we want to go further on this topic? It's a subtle question from the quote from Ra that you read that differentiates between the complete compassion and love that you feel sort of all the time beyond emotions, differentiates between that and objectivity. Like Ross specifically states that it's not objective, but it is complete loving compassion. But I don't get that. Like, wouldn't it be completely objective?
Depends how you interpret the term objective. But in the example of the questioner, they stated objectivity in relationship to like a camera that's observing a situation with complete objectivity. And then Rob replied, it's not indifference or objectivity. potentially in regards to that particular example. But if we interpret objectivity as sort of a dead state or static state of, I have the truth and this is objectively the way that it is, and I'm just seeing objects move, and there is no feeling aspect to it, or there is no connection aspect to it, or there is no empathic aspect to it. I think Roth is wanting to avoid that conclusion being made, because that's not what it is. Now, will your reflections from the mirror state, which is filled with love and compassion and sensitivity, but it's so sees the love in everything that outshines whatever the personal beliefs about the situation may be, to the point where they don't even arise anymore because they've been swallowed up by the light of that love. So, but there's total love and unity and connection. So it's not a separate state where you're on a separate sort of high horse judging the situation in objective ways, and you're not feeling, you're not connected, you're not experiencing the experience. Yes, you're experiencing the experience, but you've gotten to that state of mastery where that's no longer a personal. It's intimate, but not personal. It's one with what you are, but you see the love nature of it. That's why it requires courage to transform oneself in that way, to become like God, to merge back into the way God sees things, using the emotional guidance system to understand how wrong you really are about everything you think, and to diminish that, to soften that, to become humble again. And so it's not indifferent in that, or it's not objective in that way. However, your reflections from that state are obviously going to be less biased and less personalized, and therefore you do have a more objective observation of the situation as well to offer. So in that interpretation of the word objectivity, I would say, yes, it does result in greater ability to be objective, or to be fair, to be balanced, to have a balanced view. Balanced view is a natural expression of this mirror state. So because you see many more components, because you're not distracted by your own. And therefore, because you're all holding it in that light of love, there is a clarity and a skillfulness that becomes available in a balanced, solution-based reflection, which you could say is more objective than the one who is just fighting from their emotional pain and trying to get rid of it through fighting others or situations or policies or whatever. So yes, it does result in more objective view, but not with the connotation of disconnect.
Gotcha.
Or separation or elitism or dry intellectual, not feeling anything.
Gotcha.
But you're not having any emotional response. Again, I understand this is a difficult nuance to get for people, and it's difficult to imagine being non-emotional without being robotic or objective, like a camera would be. It's hard to imagine, but just imagine that you'd feel even more than you currently feel. You feel all the nuances of a situation. You see all the angles, or many more angles, both within your own self, your own motivations, your own lies, your own background, your own conditioning, your own themes, your own probability, your own trajectory, your own evolution, your own unresolved points and all that. You see all these things in others too that are involved in that same situation or experiential occurrence. If you see so many points of view, first of all, it's really hard to insist upon yours. So that already is the result of that is already greater love and compassion. If you can see all these points of view. I read this funny quote once. Anurag posted it on Facebook. I wish I knew exactly what it was, and I don't know who it was by, and I'm paraphrasing. It was something like, "Oh, I wish I could be less intelligent. It looks really fun to assert your own point of view as the truth." It was stated in a funnier way, but that was the essence of it. Like, oh, I wish I wasn't so smart or sensitive or whatever, so that I could just bark out my point of view. That seems fun. I would like to try that for a day. I resonated with that because I felt exactly that thought sometimes, like, oh, I wish I didn't see from so many points of view, so I could actually just make a fucking point. Because sometimes it's relieving or it's fun to see someone who can just stand for something and just like go all the way with that. Like a Trump or like a this or like a that. It's like that looks like so much fun.
It does.
Where you can just really believe in what you believe and stand for that and not like have sort of this dissipated energy that this society just it's an interesting way to interact with the society from a state of seeing all the points of view. Because then what? Like you don't, yeah. And we're all expecting. If you have a podcast, people expect an opinion. But if you have no opinion on the matter, then how do you share your message in a civilization like this? So it seems like fun to just have your own point of view and no other points of view.
Yeah.
It does seem fun.
It does.
It's like liberating in a way. Like,
Yeah.
wow, cool. And I don't feel that way anymore, but that's how I felt in the past. So that quote was kind of funny.
Oh, I feel that way all the time. It's like how nice it would just be to know, just to like master your craft exclusively and like crystallize one expertise and then just own that forever. Like you never have to constantly consider all the perspectives and all the viewpoints. Yeah. But I remember once you told me when I was doing this, I was like looking for my perspective. And I specifically was like thinking like, what do I think? Like, what even is my perspective? And you were like, you kind of laughed at me and you were like, instead of looking for like what you think or looking for a perspective, just zoom out and take the perspective. And that was awesome for me, actually. Meaning, the perspective, meaning like, yeah, more of a self-aware, self-realization approach to.
I think he used the word view. The view instead of points of view.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The view.
Instead of trying to select or enter or like down into a point of view, why not just be the view?
Nice. There you go.
That's love. And then you feel and see all the points of view, so you become more sensitive. And in a sense, you could even say it hurts you more on a bodily level. But then at the same time, the response is, over time with practice, the response is no longer that of fear or anger or opposition or lack. And therefore, you remain transparent. The window remains open to that breeze of perfection. So that's then your predominant experience. But it doesn't mean you don't feel all the things, especially if you're actively making yourself available, having sort of the remnants of that shepherding consciousness or that bodhisattva principle or vow. Then your nature is inclined, your blueprint is inclined to be very available. So it's like this is your property kind of feeling. It's like I don't have any desires for myself. I'll take on whatever shape is asked for me to take on to reflect this and that and that. So to the point of martyrdom, if you're not careful, if you're too imbalanced in the ways of love and you don't balance it with wisdom or fifth density perspective, to then arrive at that sixth density, highest level shepherding consciousness perspective where love and wisdom are in unity, where love is still there, the absolute desire to be of service, to be available is still there, but it's now viewed with wisdom. It's steeped in wisdom and allowance and acceptance. And then that seventh density is where there's less availability as a shepherd, and there's more just the being the view, just being aware of that perfection of God. It's like being at the edge of that window and like kind of stepping out of your house and just basking in that love and that perfection, and knowing and trusting that that inevitably is its own form of service. It's a very high form of being of service to others, even though you're not actively engaged in creating the forms of other people and using the mental configurations and the mirroring in an active shepherding way. The mirroring is still happening. So that would be the 100% mirror state if it was exclusive and no longer had any shepherding. But I use that a little bit more loosely. The high level shepherd, which also is very rooted in that seventh density awareness, is mirroring and has sort of mastered or perfected to a great degree the balance of love and wisdom, and the non-reactivity, the non-biased state. But they're still kind of looking also at others to an extent. And so, like I've explained a few times, I'm at that very threshold now where I feel starting to turn fully towards that light and away from seeing others or being available to others in that particular way.
I don't know if this is a whole other topic by itself, but if you have an emotion as your guidance, does that already mean that you haven't been listening to subtler levels of your guidance?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the stages are the intuitive guidance, the emotional, and the physical, circumstantial.
In this context, you might as well just call every form of guidance an emotion. Anything that comes with a charge or a response within the beingness, a reaction, some kind of a feeling about something in a way is guidance.
Okay, cool.
But again, this is taking it all the way, right? This is like nitpicking at the very highest level, like between 6 and 7 density. When again, on Earth, what's relevant for humans is to go from 3rd to 4th density for the most part, which means from their hyper-biased state into love and compassion. Even just the beginnings of it, like a more universal sense of wholeness and love and compassion.
So what's nitpicking between 6th and 7th density, though?
Well, stating that having any feeling about anything whatsoever is off.
Okay.
Right? That's pretty strict.
So
like imagine telling a human, well, if you have any feeling about anything whatsoever, any degree of a feeling, you're not in the enlightened state.
You're ignorant.
You're ignorant.
Come back to me when you have no emotion.
Come back when you don't feel anything about anything, and yet you're not objective or indifferent, and you're seeing everything as total perfect love.
Then we can talk.
Yeah. So, but again, it is possible, and part of this podcast is about demonstrating or sharing what I believe is possible.
Nice.
But it is not very relevant or probable that a lot of people will take this on at this level. And that if they do, and they're coming from any kind of vanity or self-deceit or avoidance of themselves, that it turns into a spiritual bypassing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, there is those that are anti-spiritual bypassing because they gave up on the possibility or they never knew it existed. And so they'll project their own shadows. The shadow workers will project their own shadows. They're great. Shadow workers are great at projecting their shadows onto others, onto light workers, especially. They'll project out of their own limited scope of understanding that it's not possible, or they don't even interpret it in that way. They already believe it's not possible. It's just not part of what's possible. Therefore, what I'm suggesting here is delusional, or it's promoting bypassing, because they already believe that's never possible. To be in a state free of emotion where only perfect love is viewed. Don't believe it's possible. It is possible. Should it be your goal in this lifetime? No, it doesn't have to be. Can it be? Yes, it can be. It's available. But then at least we have that context for all the other work. If you lack the end goal, if you lack the possibility, while you're doing the shadow work, you're going to get lost becoming a shadow worker. You're going to get lost becoming a Freudian, Jungian, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you're never going to experience the true bliss, or at least maybe very short glimpses of it. So it's a disservice to yourself. And at the same time, if you believe it is possible, but you're unwilling to face the self that you've created right now, then you're going to stumble and you're going to have a hard time actually integrating that level of bliss, because it requires total self-honesty and purity and the death of every bias you've ever held, or at least to the best of your ability to investigate them and release them, which you could say is shadow work, but If you're doing it from the light of what's possible, it's no longer shadow work, it's light work. And so don't believe in, don't take on either extreme, but believe in what's possible, know what's possible, and line your work up with that ultimate light. And then you can take that as far and as fast as you feel is appropriate for your journey. But if you don't know the end goal, then you're just walking circles around the base of the mountain. You got to know that you can see the whole thing from up there. And then if you want to go only 2 meters up or 20 meters up instead of the full 2,000 meters up, and you just want to sit on that plateau for a bit and talk to other people who like to sit on that plateau and they like the view from the 2 meters up, then you can do that without judgment. Well, actually you can't, because you can't not judge until you're at the top. But you can do that as honestly as you can. But at least you know what's possible. So there's a humility there, hopefully, and there is a potential to inspire you to go to the next plateau and the next plateau. Well, there's no plateaus except where you say there is one, but where you want to rest for a bit, catch your breath, and be fake. Wherever you want to be, what's the word, disingenuous?
Yeah.
That's where you'll create a little plateau to cooperate with others at that level and gossip about spirituality and gossip about others and feel righteous in your plateau. But if you don't know what's up there, then, and nobody describes that to you, then you're going to slow down your path without maybe wanting to. You can still do it if you want to, but now at least it's a conscious choice. So yes, it's possible to be in a state that's free of all emotions. And yet it's the most profound, alive feeling state, the most loving, pure, caring, emotional space you can ever imagine.
And everything else is judgmental.
Yes.
So it's a misnomer.
Because everything else is bias. And bias is judgment.
Okay, so
and it's separation, because it's seeing other as other. It's not seeing the oneself in all things. And therefore, it goes against the ocean.
Ah, okay. Okay. Gotcha. So yeah, because I mean, we always tell each other not to be judgmental. Like that's like such a common thing. You know, don't be judgmental. Stop judging. So it's just there's no way to do that on a relative
There's
level.
no way out of judgment.
Wow.
Except one way. Because the thing is, you can't, unless you're at the top of the mountain, unless you're one with God, you cannot help but be righteous. Because if you weren't righteous, you would be at the top of the mountain. You'd be one with God. So by definition, if you're not one with God in your direct experience, you're righteous. You're in your own perspective, and you believe in your own perspective over God. So you're judgmental.
Any thought
is an argument with God. Any thought is negative compared to the true natural condition of what we really are. And all spiritual journey is diminishing this vibrational difference between our true self, which is not conceived by the mind, and our personally asserted, conditioned, believed in self, which is false as can be. And can't help but be righteous. When we believe in that as ourselves, we are righteous. Even if we're super sweet and loving and polite and like dancing to the tune of how society sees a sweetheart, and they're still going to be righteous in that. If you weren't righteous, you'd be one with God in your direct experience right now, which would feel like an endless expanse of pure love, light, aliveness, oneness, perfection, bliss. There's no righteousness in bliss. If there's righteousness in bliss, it's just a perverted version of it still. Bliss is the most innocent. Just like the baby, it's causeless joy. Innocence. God is innocent. It's only those entities that out of the free will given to them deviate in their frequency from the natural state that generate what we could perceive as whatever non-innocence would appear to be. But at the heart of what we are, we're always completely pure and perfect and innocent already. So we can give ourselves permission to drop straight to that root right now. But we have to give up everything else we are righteous about, that we think is more important, and the beliefs that we believe in. And we don't until we suffer enough to know that it's worthwhile doing that. Until then, we're judgmental little creatures. Even if we're the kindest, sweetest beings.
Wow.
Because we can't help it. Are you having an emotion? Nice.
Yeah, I was totally welling up when you were talking about just the other side of the righteousness. Just like, oh. Yeah. So from this perspective, like, what does that emotion say about, what does that point to for me?
Can you describe the emotion more clearly?
I would just started tearing up and I just felt this welling.
But at what?
When you were talking about being on top of the mountain.
And what did you feel? Like the welling up wasn't just a physical phenomena.
Yeah, I just was.
That was the physical expression. What was the feeling? What was the perception?
I don't really know. It just felt like a rushing of energy, like a kind of like a wave or something.
Well, what did it feel like?
It felt really good. But
Relief?
Yeah, I suppose it was like a relief. Yeah. It did feel great though.
Was it an excitement towards, like hope? Or was it a relief? Or was it recognition?
I suppose it was, more towards recognition, or just like, it kind of felt like homeliness or familiarity or something like that. Just like a...
So something you resonate with that you want more of.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the nature of the welling up? Recognition of home or truth and the natural sort of, that's what I am or want.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm?
Yeah. But it's like, I didn't really think like what it was representing. I was just kind of feeling it, being like, shit, don't start crying on the podcast.
What?
I was like, oh shit, don't start crying on the podcast.
Why not?
No, but it just came like a super quick surge. But yeah, it's kind of interesting in the context of what we're talking about. So you're saying it's like what would you say it is in this context?
It reveals a more limiting structure, and it, in a sense, takes you out of that limiting structure for a moment. So it's a relief from a more limiting belief that was kind of hidden. And now you could maybe spot it. The belief could be like that you were not on the top of the mountain, or that maybe you forgot to have that as your standard or aim in your mind or possibility. And you were now reminded of that possibility, which uplifted you to a wavelength that is even less resistant to God's truth and energy. Therefore, for that moment, you moved closer towards that bliss of your absolute natural state. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate?
Yeah, beautiful.
So you're recognizing something that's true. And the emotion, like if you recognize something that's true, there would just be the bliss and the love of God. The nature of the welling up is the contrast between where you've held yourself and that state within which you recognize yourself. It's that release of the old toxins through the tears and stuff. It's the release of the old structures. It's the release of that old belief system. In contrast, it's and then we get a little emotional. So it's a combination of actually accessing that true bliss of the mountaintop, or the oneness with God, our true natural state. By accessing it, but not having accessed it the moment before for a period of time, that structure is then releasing or crumbling. And the contrast between the two is generating the emotion.
That's cool.
If you were established in that state and it was no longer a glimpse,
Right.
then in that particular context or moment, you wouldn't have the emotional welling up. It would just be continuation of the bliss and the love. So doesn't mean that when we show or have an emotion, I well up too sometimes because of a context or contrast or whatever. Like there's still that, or also that availability. But so it doesn't mean that if we have an emotional response, especially if it's one like that, like true relief, like sort of an innocent melting kind of devotional surrendering, like it's so beautiful. If it's like a beautiful type of emotion like that, it typically indicates that we're getting closer to God. And even at the lower levels where it's just sort of basic relief, it's still, in our perspective, we're harmonizing closer to God. But like at this level that you guys are demonstrating right now, there's even more purity and innocence to it, as it is closer to the vibration of God, because you've already trained yourself to be closer to it than most people. And so now that you step even closer into it, just by hearing about your nature, you're reminded of it and the limiting beliefs or just assumptions that you gather on a day-to-day basis by interacting with a more muddy civilization. It's putting it to contrast, and that contrast releases the old structure, which then comes out through the physical mechanism, which is a mirror, as tears or the emotional response, as it's shedding those old belief systems from the system. So when you have an experience like that, like a release emotion, like a surrender emotion, like a heart-melting emotion, it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It actually means you're actually glimpsing more of God. And in addition to the glimpsing of God, there is this emotional response. But it's also important to not glorify the emotional response as equaling the state of God.
Nice.
Because otherwise you get these sort of like perpetual devotional, sensual
Right.
crybabies where it's all about like, dramatizes
Right.
the state of God. And it's not dramatic at all. It's just sheer love and bliss is the natural state of the universe, the natural Wi-Fi signal of the motherboard of all creation. If you were aligned to it the whole time to a certain degree, and someone would talk to you about that at that same degree, there would be no emotional response. But if they were talk about alignment to that God state at an even next level for you, where you're like, oh, fuck, I didn't even see that assumption that was just lurking in the back of my mind. And now that I see that, because I've practiced releasing into God so much, now there is even more bliss. And there's like the tension you feel of how long you've been holding this unconsciously now melts off of you. So there can be the God state glimpsed at a deeper level, more transparency to the God state, plus the emotional release and reaction or response to the contrast of before and after. So the emotion still is an indication of guidance. So it's an indication of a flawed perspective that is now being seen and released. So it's in contrast to having held yourself that it's bringing you that relief on an emotional, physical level.
Wow.
Even though what you're glimpsing is the emotion-free truth of the Creator. And that's where ultimately all of the guidance is pushing every entity in creation towards. It's that unity with its own true self. Pretty neat.
It is pretty neat.
Pretty neat for sure.
So if people just understood it in this way, and it was taught in schools, then, which is up to all of you guys, it's not up to me. They'll go like, oh, when are you going to create a school program? You create it.
You already have.
Right. We have some things in place, but like you create this kind of stuff. More hands. You do. Your civilization. Implement this kind of stuff if you believe it serves a purpose. But if this could be taught at schools, for example, if people just had this understanding of their emotions, there'd be no need for the conflict that we exert on a physical level to each other. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
For being fully here and for drawing some more angles out of me. On behalf of the potential viewers, thank you for joining us. I wish you a lovely, emotion-free, yet fully sensitized, loving day.
Aww.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Mirror Talks podcast with Bentinho Massaro. If you love these teachings and you want full access to almost all of Bentinho's recorded material, go to bentinhomassaro.tv. Right now, we're offering a free 7-day trial with unlimited access to everything on bentinhomassaro.tv, including curated playlists, guided meditations, and much more. This is our #1 recommendation for you. As a subscriber, you'll get first access to these podcast episodes 2 weeks before they go public. You'll also get access to exclusive Q&As with Bentinho and other content only available to subscribers of bentinhomassaro.tv. Also, Bentinho recently created a free online global enlightenment retreat. It's 8 long-form sessions that coherently guide you through the foundation of his enlightenment teachings. You can watch the free online global enlightenment retreat at bentinhomassaro.tv or on YouTube. If you're interested in the most current and complete overview of Bentinho's work to date, this is where we recommend you start. Another great resource is Trinfinity Academy, Bentinho's free online school for enlightenment, empowerment, and infinity. Each class is concise and clear and distills one key topic at a time, including homework. We strongly recommend you check out Trinfinity Academy if you want to master the mechanics of Bentinho's teachings. Finally, don't underestimate the value of sharing this episode with the people who came to mind as you were watching or listening. It's a service to them and the collective, and it's also the best thing you can do to support us in getting this message far and wide. We also encourage you to like, subscribe, and leave positive reviews and ratings on your preferred platforms, and follow Bentinho on social media, especially Instagram. Thank you